finished up last week right around verse 8 or so, when God had promised to drive out, even in the midst, right, of the failures of the Israelites, God had promised to help drive their enemies out of it. God was not content with a partial conquest. He wanted totality of the conquest. The goal had not changed. Israel had messed some stuff up, sure. And we saw last week that they had to keep kind of going back and doing reconquering some of these places, right? Because they let them off the hook or let them take advantage or didn't do as God had asked. And we saw just kind of like a relapse, right, of those borders shrinking, increasing, so all these different things. So in the midst of the failures there, chapter 13, first 7 or 8 verses of it, the Lord graciously upheld his end of the deal, his end of the promise, and fought for Israel. And that moves us into verse number 8, which is where we're going to pick up with today, in which God begins to divide the land, right? We're going to start here by dividing the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and we're going to see that in verses 8 through 33. Now, I'm not going to read through every single verse of that. There's some things we're going to pick out, because this is pretty much a review, right? Verses 8 through 33 is a review of what God had already done for the 2.5 tribes that were on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now, if you remember, and you're a biblical historian and like to just keep random facts in your head, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, we know that which 2.5 tribes were there already. Does anyone know?
Half the tribe of Manasseh.
Half the tribe of Manasseh. And who else? Let's see, in verse, let me find where it's at. I marked it. Where is it at? So I can show you. Maybe I didn't mark it. Here we go, verse 7 and 8. Sorry, it took me a second to find it. Now, therefore, divide the land and the inheritance of the 9 tribes, half tribe of Manasseh, with whom the Reubenites and the Gadites have received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond Jordan eastward. Right. So in verse 8, we see there that it was the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half tribe of Manasseh. Okay, so that's what God had done for those 2.5 tribes, eastern side of Jordan. In verses 8 all the way down to verse 33, right? And again, I'm not going to look at all that today because that would take us a large portion of time here. Every aspect of this review of what God has done already, every aspect of it is good. With the exception, right, in verse 13. Now, I do want to look at verse 13. So if you get some time later on, whenever, you read through that, you'll see that the things that God has done, all these are good except for verse 13. Okay? And we see, nevertheless, in verse 13, I think we're just pulling one of the, this is like the bad part of this, all right? Nevertheless, the children of Israel, what does it say? And you were expelled not, right? And if you're looking at a different verse, you probably didn't expel or did not finish or whatever the case may be. Expelled not. And we know that the Israelites were supposed to expel, okay? So, the Israelites, children of Israel, did not expelled not the Gershurites, nor the Maacathites, but the Gershurites and the Maacathites, what were they doing? Dwelling among Israel even unto this day. Okay? That's bad, right? That's not what God wanted to happen. So because of verse 13, we now know there was not totality in their conquest of the land of Canaan because they did not do what they're supposed to do. They failed to move forward by faith in God, and by failing to move forward in faith, they were doing what? Disobeying God, right? That's what it is. They didn't do what God required them to do, okay? God didn't, though, fail the tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. He would have driven out all of the enemies that still in their land, just as he promised. This little snapshot here in verse 13 of Joshua 13 is kind of the beginning of a list or reference of Israel's shortfalls as we continue to move through the rest of this book. Okay? So even on the eastern side, before they really kind of even get started, God's already blessed these people with certain things, and they didn't even get rid of the people that were there, right? So the eastern land was kind of given to them before even really the major conquest of the land of Canaan, right? They were kind of already there, and they didn't even drive them out pre-conquest of the rest of Canaan, okay? So obviously that's a huge problem there, okay? Now the rest of chapter 13, all the good stuff that Israel has done up to this point in listening and the conquering of this area amongst the promised land, okay? So that's what the rest of chapter 13 is about. Now we can jump to 14, and God provides here an example of faith, okay? Now, Joshua 14 now, which is where we're going to spend pretty much the rest of our time. Joshua 14 moves forward here with the division of the western land of the western portion of the Jordan River. So we got a little 13's about what happened on the eastern side. 14's about going the western side of the Jordan River. Okay. There's another review here of what God does. We're going to look at a few more of these instances, though, as we move through this chapter. This is essentially like a summary of what is about to happen. Like, as you're reading this, eastern side's already done. This is what's going to take place, right, on the western side. And namely here, right, the big thing is the children of Israel dividing the land, right? So, chapter 14, these are the countries which the children of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar, the priest, and Joshua, the son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel, distributed for inheritance to them. By lot was their inheritance, as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses, for the 9½ tribes, right? That's what was left. For Moses had given the inheritance of 2 tribes and a half on the other side of the Jordan, but unto the Levites he had given none inheritance among them. For the children of Joseph were the 2 tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. Therefore they gave no part unto the Levites in the land, save cities to dwell in, with their suburbs, for their cattle, and for their substance. And the Lord commanded Moses. So the children of Israel did, and they divided the land. Right? So this is kind of what the rest of this is going to go on about. Before, though, this division unfolds for us in chapter 14, God is going to provide here, God provides an example of strength, courage, and faith that it takes to cause him to drive the Canaanites out. And as if you kind of look down and see there, the example that we see in verse number 6, just a quick look at that. What name pops out of verse number 6 that you recognize? Caleb, right? And what do we know about Caleb just from previous knowledge of Israel history? What do we know about Caleb?
He was with the spies.
He was with the spies, right? And what was his response to his information that he got while spying?
Good.
He was 12 men went to spy on Canaan, right? 10 of them were bad, and 2 of them were good. One of those guys was Caleb, right? Who was the other one? Joshua. Okay, so now God is going to give us an example of Caleb before he kind of goes through this process of divvying up the land, all right? And again, this is here as a reminder of what it's going to take to continue to conquer the land here of Canaan. Caleb is the example, right? Now, if you think about it, from the time that Moses sent the spies up until now through scriptures, have we seen much mention of Caleb? The answer is no, we have not, right? We know he was a good guy. We know he was faithful. We know he and Joshua obviously are probably buddies, right? Probably, I'll just, cousins or whatever the case, good friends, what the case may have been. I didn't do a deep dive on that relationship. But we now see him kind of coming back to the forefront here as an example for us. And the conclusion of his story fits very nicely into this narrative of the allotment of the land. Right, so that's why this is kind of placed in here for us. Caleb is going to go to Joshua to remind him of what the Lord had said to Moses concerning them in Kadesh Barnea. All right, so let's read there starting in verse 6. And we'll read first of all down to verse number 10. Then the children of Judah came unto Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said unto him, Thou knowest the thing the Lord said unto Moses the man of God, concerning me and thee, concerning us, in Kadesh Barnea. 40 years old was I, when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to espy out the land, and I brought him a word again, as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses sware on that day, saying, Surely the land whereon thy feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance and thy children's forever, because thou hast wholly followed the Lord my God. And now behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, even since the Lord spake his word unto Moses, while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, lo, I am this day 85 years old. So, interesting little timeline we have here, right? We don't get these a lot in scriptures sometimes. We got a good little timeline here. So we know that 40 years prior to the Israelites conquering the land of Canaan, Joshua and Caleb and the 10 other spies went in, and Caleb was, as we mentioned, aforementioned, one of the ones that was faithful to what God could possibly have done. And we know that at that point in his lifetime, he was 40 years old. How long did the Israelites wander around the wilderness for? 40 years. Okay. Caleb tells us here now that he is how old at the end of verse number 10? 85. How long has this conquest of Israel taken into Canaan now? 5 years, right? So we got a timeline here. This is cool, right? We're able to see these little timelines. God gives us this, kind of see exactly. So for 5 years now, the Israelites have been going through Canaan, trying to conquer it, okay? And they've taken land and gotten land back, and taken land and gotten land back. Should this have taken 5 years? The answer is no. Absolutely should not have taken 5 years, right? Now, I can't put a timeline on how long it should have taken, but how many times should have the children of Israel had to have conquered the land of Canaan? Once, right? We know that is not the case, okay? So now we see another cool thing happening here. Caleb, 45 years now older than he was when he initially got to the promised land. We're now beginning to see the divvying up of this land. And Caleb, who probably was one of Joshua's good buddies, right, and has been now for quite some time, in the midst of this division of this land, he comes to Joshua to remind him what the Lord had said. Now, over in Numbers 13 and 14 is the actual account of the spies going in, and Israel sought to, if we remember, what did the Israelites want to do to Joshua and Caleb when they came back with their report to Moses? Do you remember? Does anyone remember? they wanted to stone him, right? They were ready to kill him on the spot because they said, yeah, we can do this, right? And they were, no, crazy people. They wanted to kill them and stone them on the spot. Now, that's over in Numbers 13 and 14 is the whole account. So when the men called on Israel to trust the Lord to get into the promised land, that's what was the response was. God promised Joshua and Caleb that they would enter the promised land because of their faith in God. Right now, we know the rest of the Israelites who wanted to stone them, did they make it in? Answer is no. They died in the wilderness. Okay, Joshua and Caleb got in because of their faithfulness. If you look at down at verse, that's towards the end there of Numbers chapter 14. God kind of mentions that, right? So, back to this now, right? So this is the memory. This is what happened. Caleb's now bringing us back to the forefront of what's going on here as this land is getting divided up. Caleb goes on to say, verse number 7, as we read here of chapter 14, that the report he brought back from spying out of the land. Verse number 7, 40 years old, when the servant of the Lord sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy on the land. And when he came back, where did Caleb's message come from? End of verse 7. His what? Heart. His heart, right? His message came from his heart, which is a descriptor for us as the reader to say that his faith in God is genuine, right? Caleb has a genuine faith in God because he understood what God wanted them to do, what God was capable of, and when Moses looked at him and said, all right, Caleb, what's your opinion? His opinion came from, his message came from his heart because his faith was genuine. And he wholly followed the Lord, as verse 8 describes him, right? Now, we don't get a ton about Caleb in the Scriptures. There's some things there, but not a ton, right? We don't have as much about Caleb as we do, like, say, Joshua or Moses or somebody else. Every time we see Caleb in Scriptures, though, what do we see him doing? Being faithful, right? And being described as being very, very faithful. And apparently, this had lasted the entirety of Caleb's life. We saw him being faithful at 40. We see him still being faithful at 85 because there's no doubt in Caleb's mind that God is stronger than any Canaanite or any force or anything else that is out there. And he has never, ever wavered, as far as we have seen in Scriptures, the accounts of him on that. He knew that God would faithfully keep his word to chase out the inhabitants. Verse number 8 of chapter 14. And nevertheless, my brethren that went up with me made the heart of the people melt, and I wholly follow the Lord my God. The other 10 spies, of course we know, right, refused to enter, and it melted or feared the hearts of the Israelites, meaning that they had crushed any hope that they had in God's ability. Right? The effect of the 10 spies of Israel is the same effect. Those 10 men's opinion had the exact same effect on the Israelites as the crossing of the Red Sea had on the Canaanites. The Scriptures are the same, right? Rahab told the other 2 spies, right, that the hearts are melted because of the reputation of what is taking place, right? Both sides lacked courage. Canaanites' melted hearts, very understandable. Amazing things have happened. Israelites and their melted hearts, on the other hand, completely inexcusable. Right? Completely inexcusable. They had every reason to be courageous and should have continued to be courageous because, of course, they know they had God on their side. Caleb had held on to that promise, right? He had held on to that promise that he was going to inherit the portion of Canaan. And what was it in verse number 9? And Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land, what does it say? Anywhere that where? Right? Anywhere Caleb had walked, right? And we'll take this literal. Anywhere in the promised land that Caleb walked was going to be his. Right? The Lord was going to give him that as an inheritance. So his portion of Canaan on that which he walked. Now, if I was Caleb, what would I do when I got into the Canaan in the promised land? What would you do if you were Caleb when you got into the promised land?
Walk everywhere.
Exactly, right? As many places as I could go. 100%. Right? Maybe he did that. Regardless, Caleb was holding on to the promise for 45 years, and he was ready to embrace the future with confidence in the Lord. Even at 85, he is prepared to begin his new life in Canaan. That would claim his inheritance, chase out the formidable enemies, settle into the land that he had claimed, and then start passing on the blessings to the next generations. By faith, right? By faith for him. You got to think about this. Caleb's life is doing what at 85 right here, in his mind? His life is doing what? Just beginning, right? By faith, at 85, Caleb's life is just beginning in his mind, right? A rocking chair of retirement is the farthest thing from Caleb's mind here. He's like, hey, well, let's go. All right, let's get started. I want to get the inheritance. I want to get stuff going. I want to get life wants to begin. Because the Lord still had work for him to do. There is no retirement in the spiritual workforce. Right? There is no retirement in the spiritual workforce. Now, does the job change? Sure. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. But there is no just stopping. Caleb here is an example for us at 40, right? So I'm getting close to 40. Still got a few years to go, but I'm getting close. So I can look at Caleb at 40 and think, this was the way in which he lived his life. This was his faithfulness. This was how he conducted himself. And that gives me an example to look at, right? And then in 40 years, I can look at Caleb again and see, all right, so he went through, raising kids and whatever the case may have been for 40 years. A lot of life happened for Caleb from 40 to 85. He saw a lot of stuff. And we see that what technically should have been the end of his life, we still see him remaining to be faithful to the work, faithful to the Lord, right? Changing some. He's not spying around and helping the armies here, right? But now he's ready to do whatever else needs to be done. I would assume this is Lanciism, but do you think Caleb probably spending multitudes of time in prayer for his fellow countrymen as they are going out and conquering this land? I'm sure that he was. Did Caleb probably have some family members that were involved specifically, directly on the front lines of the army of Israel as they were going through Canaan? More than likely, probably so, right? I would assume so. Was Joshua probably coming to Caleb at times and just kind of getting some stuff off his chest because he needed somebody to talk to? Probably, right? We can assume those things probably happened. But the thing here is that every little snapshot that we get of Caleb, we see he is always being described as he is faithful to the Lord. It did not matter what was going on, the circumstances, he remained faithful to the cause of Christ, because that's what Caleb was. And it's a great example for us, right? As I continue to get older, right? As I get closer to 60 and 70 and 80, right? If I'm still around for that long, the job doesn't change. Excuse me. The purpose of the job doesn't change. Sure, I'm not going to be able to do the same things, but things don't change as far as who I am serving and what I am serving for. I know there are some ladies in this church who spend hours on end during the week in prayer for people. I know it because I've seen it happen. Okay, I know that's part of the job training, right? Or part of the job not training. That's part of the job that they feel like they can help with, have what the Lord has called them to do. Okay, it's no stopping. There's no retirement for any of us essentially when it comes to that. Caleb did not here ask for a portion of the land that he could possess with a minimum effort. Okay, and what we see here is Caleb requested a specific area, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Okay. Over in Numbers 13, let's flip over there. I do want to show one little thing here. Go to verse 22 of Numbers 13. Numbers 13, verse 22. And they ascended by the south and came unto Hebron, where the Ahiman, the Sheshai, the Talmai, the children of Anak were. Okay. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. That's a really interesting little timeline there. We don't have time to get into that today, but it's really interesting that Hebron was essentially here before the superpower of Egypt's what it was. Okay, and I'm just, and everybody get a chance. Pastor Rob, I always have to mention, we know that the Anaki were what type of people? They were giants. Okay, and they had built Hebron in such a way that it was there before Egypt. And we know that during this time specifically, right, Egypt was what? Pretty powerful, right? Pretty powerful area that had been there for quite some time. Hebron, this area in Canaan, was actually, let's start looking at some of the timelines, was there beforehand and was probably, may have been even a little more impressive than what Egypt had going on. It was all built by giants. Just, again, you know me. Talking about giants, I always got to mention the things when we find giants in the scriptures. Back to verse 22, 7 years beforehand. Jump over to verse 28, same chapter. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of the Anak there, down to verse 31. But the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report, I'm just going to finish the chapter here, of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that is eaten up, and the inhabitants thereof. And all the people we saw were the men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants, and we in our own sight are as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. All right, so what's important, I want you, while we're doing this, right, while I'm kind of going to bring this up, is, so now we've got Caleb who is coming to Joshua for his inheritance of the land that he knows that God has promised, and he's just kind of reminding Joshua what God said. Okay, and God told Caleb, we know what he's been told. All right, and we know that one of the main reasons that originally that the Israelites didn't go in is because they were afraid of the giants and the big people and the armies that were in Canaan. Okay, Caleb was not scared of them. He knew that God was, able to conquer them. Caleb was eager, right, to come back and say, let's go. There shouldn't be a problem. He was eager to take on the Anaki, these giants, the Anakim people. The rest of the Israelites feared them, right? So it would have been understandable for Caleb to forego his dream and leave the Anakim alone. But let's go to verse 11 of chapter 14 of Joshua. Okay, so let's go back to Joshua. And go back over to verse 11. And yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. Right? So what's Caleb saying right there? At 85, what?
Not old and feeble.
Right? He's like, even at 85, I can still do what I did at 40. That's what he's saying here. That's exactly what the response is. He looks at him and says, as yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day of Moses that sent me. As my strength was then, so is my strength now, for war, both to go out and to come in. Now therefore, verse 12, give me what? This mountain. Let's keep going in 12. Wherefore the Lord spake that day, for thou heardest in that day how the giants were there, and the cities were great and fenced. If so be the Lord will be with me, then I shall be able to drive them out. So at Caleb, at 85, and the division of the land is getting ready to start, and he thinks back to 40 years previously, and he's like, there's giants up there, but they don't matter. We can conquer those giants. The people of Israel are scared of those giants, and they try to have me killed for it. 45 years later, now we're getting to where the land is being divvied up to these people, and Caleb is reminding Joshua, hey, this is the promise, right? God told me this. He's reminding him of this. Caleb is not forgotten. There are apparently still what? There are still giants there 45 years later, okay, in Hebron, in Anakim, right, in this area of Hebron, as more commonly as we know it. And Caleb says to Joshua that, hey, you're divvying up the land, I want what? Them. And they're still there. I don't care because I'm going to do what? I'm going to kill them. I'm taking over the giant land. Because I said we could do it 40 years ago because God told me that we could and nobody would listen to me. Now I'm still 45 years later, still understanding that it is the same God I served then, and He's telling us to take it, and if you boys ain't going to do it, I will at 85. Talk about a heart, right, that is invested in his Father. I'm 36, and I'm getting to, I still feel, body feels just as good as it did at 18, right? I'm noticing, though, it doesn't recover like it used to, right? Full day of work, next day at 18, I was ready to go again, right? Full day of work at 36, I can still go, but it takes me a little longer to get out of bed and get moving, right? And I know that's going to get worse as I get older. Did Caleb feel the same body-wise at 40 as he does at 85? Physically, did he feel the same probably on a day-to-day basis? Probably not, right? It would make sense that an 85-year-old man feels different than a 40-year-old man. And then Caleb's mind, right, and I get it, right? I can feel myself getting that way too a little bit. Man, young guys, I can do the same stuff, right? And teenagers think they can do whatever, they don't know, right? I get it. I can still do these things. But physically, I'm aware that it doesn't happen that way. But Caleb, because of not arrogance, right? Stubbornness, sure, absolutely. Caleb's stubborn, right? Righteously so. But this confidence comes from a life that had been lived faithfully serving God for 45 years, that he looks up there and sees probably some of those same stinking giants he saw 40 years ago, looked a little bit different, probably had some less hair and gray beards or whatever the case may be. And he says, you know what, Caleb, or you know what, Joshua, if you won't listen to God, if you can't go do it, I will. Give me that mountain. Verse 13, and Joshua blessed him, and gave unto Caleb the son of Jephunneh Hebron for an inheritance. Verse 14, Hebron then became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite unto this day, because that he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. And the name of Hebron before was Kirjath Arba, which Arba was a great man among the Anakim. I don't have time to talk about Arba. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more next week. Next week. And the land had, what's it said at the end of chapter 15? Or in chapter 14, the land had what? Rest from war, right? It had rest from war. Caleb's physical strength at the age of 85, pretty amazing. Not physical strength to make him a formidable foe, though. There are other people in Israel who are stronger, more capable. Caleb's real strength resided in his spiritual fortitude. He is deeply devoted. Devotion makes all the difference. Caleb's perseverance and fortitude in driving out Anakim provided an example for Othniel. Othniel is Caleb's much younger brother. And this is over in Judges chapter 1, right? Othniel is much younger. Othniel became what? Don't remember? He became the first judge of Israel. Okay, so Othniel was the first judge of Israel much later on. We know that eventually the judges come in, and what the judge, after Joshua comes the judges, right, and the things that happen there. So years later he becomes this. He was probably around 80 when he judged Israel and delivered them from their first kind of conquering the king of Mesopotamia. And that's his Judges chapter 1. You can, if you want to fact check me there. Okay, that's where this is at. Othniel, much like Caleb, served God the rest of the days of his life. So we see Joshua blessing Caleb here and granting his request. Hebron becomes the home of Caleb because he wholly followed the Lord. Hebron, situated way up in the high country, about 25 miles south of Jerusalem, and becomes pretty fitting that Caleb's area became kind of the high ground, right? Because Caleb had always traveled the high road in the way in which he lived his relationship with the Lord. Verse 15, we see him conquering, in verse 15 of chapter 14, we see him conquering Hebron. If you'll just, I'm going to finish with this. Look over to chapter 15, verse 14, just right across the page. What does Caleb do? And Caleb drove thence the what? The three sons of Anak. Anak is the main giant. Those three sons would have been what? Giants. Yeah, they would have been giants, right? And Caleb, 85-year-old Caleb, right? Can you just picture this for a second, right? These Anak, these giants, right? Caleb drove them out, the three sons, Shishaiah, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. So you got these giants, these warring giants. You got this 85-year-old geezer, right? Like, after him with the sword. That's what happened here, and they left because of Caleb's faithfulness in God. Caleb eventually gives Hebron to the Lord over in Joshua 21. We'll get there. There are reports that Hebron became one of 48 Levitical cities, and it was designed also later on as a city of refuge. Now, probably some of y'all weren't here. We did the cities of refuge before Pastor Rob came, and I was in charge of the place. I don't know why y'all put me in job. That was up here. We did the cities of refuge. Anyways, Hebron became one of the city of refuge, which is important later on. Sanctuary city in Hebron, right? That's what that was. Okay, so that's what the beginning of what chapter 14 is about, and you get a snapshot there of Caleb, which is always fun to see, like God bring things back full circle for us. So we'll get into chapter 15 to next week, right? We'll go all the way down to first chapter 20. There's a ton of stuff to cover in this lesson. That's why it's taking me 3 weeks. So we'll do that next week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you again for our time together, for the opportunity to see your faithfulness remain to those who are faithful to you, Lord. That's kind of the thing here. Even in old age, we see people still doing miraculous things for you by your power because of their faithfulness to you, Lord, and your faithfulness to them. And I pray that's a reminder for us to continue to season in years that we are remaining faithful to the call of serving and being faithful to you. Pastor Rob here comes in next a little bit as well. Keep us attentive to the word he has for us today. And I pray. Amen.
Back home.
Yes. Okay.